This winter was extremely dry, so we're expecting to see more flames moving forward. Allison?
All right. I have no doubt we will be talking to you, but hopefully this will be a better year if they can catch some sort of a break. Steve Patterson, thanks so much.
Got it.
Tonight, President Joe Biden center stage his first address to a joint session of Congress before a nation still deeply divided over the election, still reeling from the pandemic. Just ahead, the president's big plans, from infrastructure to climate to economic relief, and the big price tag with it. Can a president who promised bipartisanship find common ground with Republicans? Or will Democrats with narrow control of Congress go it alone? America will be watching tonight in this presidential address to Congress.
From NBC News, a presidential address to Congress. Live from Studio 1A in New York, here are Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lester Holt here with Savannah. Just moments from now, President Joe Biden will enter the House chamber to speak to a joint session of Congress. The president, who for decades has either been a senator watching from the gallery or a vice president sitting on stage, now the man of the moment. It probably isn't going to look a lot like he imagined in his mind. We'll explain that in a moment. But as per tradition, we should tell you the first speech by a new president to Congress is called a joint address rather than a State of the Union, but it's going to look like a State of the Union.
It'll look a lot like a State of the Union. And already before one word has been uttered tonight, history has been made. Two women behind the podium for the first time in our nation's history. And this is also the first time Congress has met for a joint session in that very chamber since January 6th, when rioters attacked the heart of our democracy. The president tonight has a big agenda. He's set to unveil a new $1.8 trillion plan that he says will help working American families.
And you can see folks finding their seats. There's Chuck Schumer there. The seating is quite wide and quite varied, trying to keep people from closer interactions here in the age of COVID. I want to go to NBC Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander, who's been learned a little bit more about the president's preparations and what he plans to try to sell to the American people tonight. Peter?
Yeah, Lester, we're getting an early look at some of the president's comments through his excerpts provided to us. The president will say that America is on the move again. He'll push Congress, in his words, to turn peril into possibility. Aides tell me that he has been revising this speech for days. As we watch the chamber right now, we are told it'll be about an hour long. And the biggest takeaway here, this call for what amounts to the largest expansion of government spending in decades, all said nearly $6 trillion to do it. As you see, the First Lady, Jill Biden, and the second gentleman, he's going to want to raise taxes on corporations and the wealthy. But tonight we will be watching that chamber and the reaction from Republicans, Lester and Savannah, who say it's a non-starter.
All right, Peter, thank you.
Let's turn to NBC's Casey Hunt, who is inside that chamber right now. And as we mentioned, this is not going to look like speeches we've seen in the past. For one thing, where there usually would be about 1,600 people in that House chamber, there's only about 200 now. Not the full Senate, Casey, not the full House, not as many members of the Supreme Court and the cabinet, and also pandemic changes and security changes as well.
That's right, Savannah. And I have to tell you, it is surreal to be here for this event. I'm standing up in the House gallery. It's where we normally cover these addresses from. But instead, there's only a handful of reporters and so few people on the floor. The atmosphere feels almost casual. It's very strange. It's more like any normal day with a normal number of people who might be scattered around on the House floor than it is like a huge ceremony like a joint address or a State of the Union. And what you can see on your screen, of course, is pandemic precautions. The chairs that have paper sitting on them are blocked off. Every person has an assigned seat who's been able and invited to attend. Their names are taped
Casey, let's pause
to the
for
back
a moment
of their
and
chairs.
listen
Savannah.
to this moment. Let's pause for a moment.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
William Walker, the Sergeant of Arms, the first black Sergeant of Arms, introducing the president.
Imagine 47 years ago, Joe Biden first came to Congress. He has sat through many of these speeches, but never has he walked down the aisle and been the man of the hour, the one to deliver the address. And what a time. As mentioned, though, Casey, we've seen these pandemic precautions, a slimmed-down audience, and also security precautions in light of what happened in that very room just a couple of months ago on January 6th.
Stand in the wake of that insurrection. The reality is security here is much tighter than it normally is. Members of Congress even having to go through magnetometers like you might at a TSA screening at the airport, something that is incredibly unusual, has never happened before. It's in keeping with the new rules of the House of Representatives in the wake of the January 6th insurrection, with concerns that members of Congress may carry something dangerous, Savannah.
I attended a meeting with the president and some other TV journalists, largely off the record today, to talk about what he wants to unveil tonight. But he seemed very relaxed, very confident, and it's clear he's picking things that are popular.
No question.
Big price tags, but popular.
Yeah, and this was normally
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
This pomp and circumstance is going to take a little less time than usual because of this smaller crowd. So let's listen to the president as he addresses the nation for the first time since taking office.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good to be back. Mitch and Chuck will understand it's good to be almost home, down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words, and it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America's ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America. None. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together, we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January, down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," was her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried. Cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against a window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. The single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work, but she said the relief check put food on the table, and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor, something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger is down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time ever investments, ever, in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America, our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united 2 oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. Creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. Jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways. Jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. a clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines so every American can drink clean water. And in the process, it will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would, because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican, Democrat or Republican voters. Their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. The American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have this capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s: buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, no one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well, equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, the American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year I was vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And they've excused the point of personal privilege. I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, "Name it after my deceased son." It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and, in turn, America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from. Puts them in a position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years, and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. The research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee when I'm proposing in legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high-quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck, or taking care of themselves and their loved ones, or parent or spouse or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families. on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. By the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough, Democrats and Republicans. Let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody. But I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say, They don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America. Ask them, whose taxes you want to raise? Instead, whose are going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them? So they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as what we're experiencing now, the pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America was an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone. It's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to only matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world: China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. My attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity and raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I propose tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do for NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to our alliances. And I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionally to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years and knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today, we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who are not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. And make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want. I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer wearing Kevlar vests? I mean, they'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it, because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. It's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration and to help keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers, the young people who've only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster, as well as a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it, but let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking, that we do our part, all of us. If we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There is not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
President Biden delivering a speech a little over an hour to about 200 people in the House chambers. As we've been telling you, the COVID protocols only allowing a small number there, but delivering a speech that covered, frankly, a lot of ground. But those themes near the end, the whole notion that democracy itself is being tested and the challenge that we can rise above it, I think it's kind of the bedrock of this speech. And of course, his very large initiatives with large price tags, but ambitious, but may ultimately prove very popular.
Yeah, it got philosophical at the end, saying the president saying that democracy itself was on the line right now. There was a refrain we heard many times: the American people support it, Congress should act. The president laying out a very ambitious agenda. You've heard the price tag. It proposed nearly $6 trillion in new spending that would in some ways remake the American economy. And we will see how it goes over, not just with the opposing party, but with Democrats themselves, who of course hold the majority, but the slimmest of majorities in the House and a dead even tie in the Senate. So you see the political situation. Here's the exit that we always like to watch, but because there aren't so many people in the hall, we can actually hear some of the
conversation. It might be worth listening because it's a very small group. Then again, he may know we're listening in, so
he must have gotten that funny feeling.
Bernie Sanders there as part of that conversation. But yeah, he's able to actually work the room in a much more intimate way than you would typically see in these things.
Let's bring in Chuck Todd, get his first thoughts on the speech we heard tonight. Chuck?
Well, look, I do think that the president was quite comfortable. You know, he hasn't given a ton of speeches over the last 2 years. Normally a first-term president, we've already seen him speak so much, but we had the unusual campaign. And this was the most comfortable I think he's been so far. But on the substance of the speech, and Savannah, I want to get at sort of the price tag. The president and the Democrats are making a huge bet that basically COVID completely has changed the way the American people want their relationship with government. That the Democrats are betting that COVID was this sort of wake-up call that government is part of the answer. Government is part of the solution. And I think about, you know, my whole adult life, you had both political parties backing away from that. And it really isn't, not since the 40s, 50s, and 60s have we had a president advocating some big spending and big projects like this. We'll see if they're right, but they do believe that the American people's mind has sort of changed now post-COVID and that they want more government. Our own polling has shown there is an appetite for more government.
Yeah, this is a kind of a remarkable moment here as the president holds court with members of Congress here before leaving the room, and this is what he likes to do. Let me bring in Andrea Mitchell right now, our chief Washington correspondent. Andrea, he went down the list. I mean, he ticked virtually every issue. But when you stand back at 30,000 feet and look at it, what are the things that he thinks he can get done?
He thinks he can get this jobs plan done. Now, he's going to have to scale it back. But he said jobs more than any other thing in this entire speech. He talked about jobs. He talked about it as the solution to climate change, as the way to compete against China, as the way to build America back. But I also thought, he was so passionate about human rights that we have not heard in a State of Union in some time, or a joint session speech. He also talked about the soul of America, and that was so passionate when he talked about the injustice. The knee of injustice is on the neck of Black America, and talked about George Floyd's daughter, his young daughter, saying, "Daddy changed the world." I think that he thinks that he can get the George Floyd bill passed. He did not take the House position. He's talking about compromise. He's talking about Tim Scott, whom we're going to hear from, who is leading the Senate on this, and he wants to get it done by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. That is an ambitious goal, but I think that they think that they can get this done. And as Chuck said, though, they're not paying for these big bills. The tax bill, getting this tax bill through is a really big reach. So they're now betting that the American people are willing to pay for something and believe in government as well. I thought it was a remarkable speech, again, also because as he did in his inaugural, he spoke about white supremacy being the real threat, the worst terror threat to America. We haven't heard American presidents say that until this president, Joe Biden. Look how comfortable he is, though, Savannah and Lester. He loves being home. He said, "I'm home. It's great to be home again." He is on the floor of the chamber that he knows so well, and he's having a great time.
He might not leave.
I was going to say, pressing the flesh with members of Congress that's Joe Biden in his natural environment right there, and this is an unconventional address to the joint session of Congress, but he's going to enjoy it for all it's worth as he chit-chats with some of the members of Congress on the way out the door. Andrea, I'm glad you mentioned Senator Tim Scott. We actually await the Republican response to the address, which will be delivered tonight by South Carolina's Republican Senator Tim Scott. So we expect that any minute now. Let me go to Casey Hunt, who's still in the House chamber and can see she's got a different vantage point and gets kind of the feel of the room. Casey, what did you observe?
While I'm watching exactly what you were just talking about, I'm going to be in this chamber as we all will be here as long as Joe Biden, President Biden is in here now talking with Jim Clyburn, one of his closest allies. This speech and being in this room could not have been a more stunning contrast this year than it was last year when former President Trump gave a raucous speech that was in many ways carefully produced for television and only briefly mentioned coronavirus. He said then that he was working with China on coronavirus. And in that year, COVID has utterly changed our politics, our lives, what Americans care about. I think what you were discussing about the issues that President Biden hit on here and how people are now needing to interact with their government has dramatically changed because of the realities that they face in their own lives. And in many ways, President Biden rose to the moment that we were facing as a country, and the experience he brought to the table was in many ways perhaps more appreciated than it might have been had we not been facing such a dramatic crisis. And I think the sense of urgency to do something about that is what is leading this White House to really push forward with, as Andrea said, these very big plans. They looked out at this Republican and Democratic audience tonight, much, much smaller than normal. The vibe in the room was almost casual. There were members who were kicking off their shoes, putting their feet on the back of chairs up in the galleries. It was very, very different from the very celebratory and formal, frankly, atmospheres that typically accompany these speeches. But, for Biden, one of the things that stood out to me was that there was only really one place in the speech where Republicans booed President Biden, and it was in relation to H.R. 1, which deals in many ways with voting rights, and that's something that's really animated the Republican base, especially after former President Trump's false claims about the election. But the lack of vocal opposition from Republicans on the floor tonight, you do typically get many times where the opposing party will boo, especially in more recent years, and on both sides of the aisle, depending on who has held the White House. And that just didn't really happen here. And I think that underscores in a kind of colorful way the political dynamics at play here. And that's why the White House is pushing forward with these big initiatives and essentially daring Republicans to stand in the way of initiatives that are popular. And, they seemed relatively reluctant to do so here tonight, Savannah.
All right, Casey, thank you.
As we continue to watch the president taking his time and speaking to members of Congress and others in the chambers, looks like he may be heading.
There's the joint session of the two houses now dissolved.
Okay, that's almost like the music of the Academy Awards. It's time to move on.
The speaker's playing out the band.
I think he's going to be able to stay as long as he wants, but let me in the meantime go to NBC Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, typically the way these things play out, you make the big pitch, the big program, and then you go sell it. How do they plan to sell it?
Yeah, Lester, that's right. In fact, this president is going to go on the road beginning tomorrow. He will head to Atlanta. Actually, the first stop I'm told he's going to make by White House officials will be visiting Jimmy Carter, the former president, and his wife Rosalind Carter in Plains, Georgia. It was then Senator Joe Biden who was the first to endorse then candidate Jimmy Carter so many years ago, but a show of respect to a former Democratic president. And on that topic, you really are struck by some of these moments you're seeing here, more traditional politics taking place. The president in his speech tonight with a nod to Mitch McConnell, praising him, thanking him for his kindness in naming one of the cancer initiatives back in 2016 after Beau Biden, the president's late son. Just moments ago, you saw Rob Portman, the Republican from Ohio, sharing an extended moment with the president there. But as you hear this speech tonight, I'm struck by Bill Clinton in 1996, now 25 years ago, saying that the era of big government is over. Well, tonight, Joe Biden effectively said that the era of big government is back. And another item that's notable is the fact that this took place almost in May, really, in the eyes of his aides and allies, benefited the president. It wasn't just symbolic, approaching 100 days, but also strategic, that the president would have been in a position, they said, or was in a position tonight to demonstrate some of his successes to this point. The shots in the arms, jobs, checks as well, because he's going to need all that fuel going forward to try to accomplish this ambitious agenda. Savannah and Lester.
Yeah, we're going to dig into that agenda a little bit more, but we await the remarks from the Republicans. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina will have his moment at the podium when we return right after this.
Right now on Morning News Now, we begin with the dawn of a new day in Washington.
Mr. President, you've been aspiring to this office for your whole career.
We're looking at vaccination manufacturing to nearly double over the course of the next month.
I just want to show you what's happening right now. They're making their way up the steps of the U.S. Capitol.
Our team of correspondents is here.
Tonight, the accelerated vaccination timetable as more states lift COVID restrictions. Is it your expectation that you can adapt to any variants out there? The president is talking about winning over some Republicans. Where might he compromise? Is there a chance people could be dealing with long-lasting symptoms for the rest of their lives? Those delivering kindness while fighting hunger in this pandemic.
How are you today?
Very grateful, believe me.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
You're watching NBC News Now.
The pace is accelerating to get vaccine doses into arms.
The hope is using advanced robotics to try to scale up to doing thousands of samples.
Welcome back. President Biden has left the House chambers after his almost a State of the Union speech, his joint address to members of Congress. We're going to get the Republican response from Senator Tim Scott in just a moment, but I want to go back to Chuck right now. And Chuck, we talk about how the president will sell this. How will he try to sell this to Republicans? How will he identify those Republicans he thinks he can work with and make this happen?
I think it's going to be cutting the bill up into pieces and in piecemeal form. I mean, there are, you heard one of the briefings that I was at today with Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi. He was talking about how their water bill has bipartisan support. The one half of his big bill has enough bipartisan support. You could split it up into pieces. I think that's one thing that's going to happen. And here's the other thing, is you already have Democratic senators, we've learned tonight, senators like John Tester, Chris Coons, Brian Schatz, ideologically all over the place, who are starting to float the idea of, hey, you don't have to raise taxes to pay for all of this. Maybe we should do deficit spending, finance some of this, not all of this, with tax hikes. So I think we're already getting some signs. And you want another way of perhaps getting Republicans on board? Maybe have them be a part of the deals that won't have tax hikes in them. So I think it'll be both cutting it up into pieces, and how they finance it will tell us how many Republicans get on board.
And we got a big hint in how he plans to sell it, Chuck. The word jobs was mentioned 43 times. And in fact, he framed the climate change debate in terms of jobs. He said that's how it should be thought of. So it's clear how he thinks this will sell to the American people. Let's go to Senator Tim Scott.
I'm Senator Tim Scott from the great state of South Carolina. We just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words, but President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us sharing one bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry, and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First with a praying mama. And let me say this to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it. You can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. This administration pushed us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste, plus the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress. but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. And it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who's voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And no, the same filibuster that President Obama and President Biden praised when they were senators, the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year, has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people. Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
That was Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina with the Republican response. An upbeat address, lasted about 10, 15 minutes or so. And he took on this issue saying that President Biden had promised unity, but that in fact Democrats have not demonstrated unity. And that's clearly the theme that he was hitting tonight.
And we have heard that theme time and time again. You're going to hear it more now as the country, as both sides begin to absorb what the president laid out today with this American Families Bill. Again, we keep talking about the price tag is high, but there was a lot in it that people will want to certainly be looking at.
Well, it's interesting because Chuck brought up that perhaps the pandemic had changed Americans' views about the role of government. Peter mentioned the famous State of the Union, President Clinton saying the era of big government is over. The question, is it not? Well, Tim Scott put his finger on the scale and said, we do not need the government from cradle to college, which is what he said the president was calling for tonight with this American Families Plan.
Let's go to Andrea Mitchell right now. And Andrea, as we mentioned, the word jobs is repeated over and over again. That seems to be what the president believes will sell this, the notion that this will put people to work.
Absolutely. The president focusing on jobs more than 40 times, using the word jobs, using it also as an element of foreign policy against our foreign adversaries, that we can rebuild America. Senator Scott, who is very authentic and a very appealing spokesman for the Republican Party, especially, of course, on the issue of race. He's the only black Republican. But he was also saying that there is only 6% in the infrastructure or jobs bill that's really infrastructure. The Washington Post already has a fact check up saying that that's not the case, that it's as much as 24% of the overall cost or as little as 10%, but not just 6%. But in any case, there's going to be a lot of argument over that. But what the president did in his speech was to really make it a case of build America, buy America. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I think we have a piece of sound we're going to play right now from
the American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American.
So he's making it a moment of patriotism to support this bill. I thought he actually sold the bill as well as anyone could tonight. It's a remarkable speech from this president, and also a remarkable response from Senator Tim Scott.
Andrea, thank you. And this was a historic night right from the beginning. Two women behind a president on the House dais for the first time. Kristen Welker is NBC's chief White House correspondent. Kristen, talk more about that.
Well, Lester, it was a history-making moment that you saw President Biden embrace. From the very first words that came out of his mouth, he said it's about time, as he stood there in front of the first black, the first woman vice president, and of course House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who became the first woman House Speaker back in 2007. And these are two women who are President Biden's closest advisors at the White House and on Capitol Hill. Of course, the vice president is helping to spearhead his effort, particularly when it comes to immigration. And then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has helped to spearhead that first big piece of legislation, and she'll be critical in this next push that he is working on. And it comes against the backdrop of this historic moment for women in politics. There are more women in the Congress, in the Senate right now than ever before. 27% in the House, 24% in the Senate. Now, if you talk to those lawmakers, they'd say that's not enough. We're fighting for more women in those slots. And of course, because of social distancing, they weren't all in the chamber tonight, but it certainly is significant. But it's a different story if you look at women and the economy right now. Women have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, by the pandemic. You heard the president mention that. 2.4 million fewer women in the workforce than last year before the pandemic started, 1.8 million fewer men. So that sets the stage. And those are numbers that the president is helping to make his argument for why this sweeping jobs plan is necessary. And of course, as we've been talking about all night long, Republicans say the price tag is just too big. It is worth noting that race police reform also front and center, with President Biden laying down a new marker tonight, calling for the George Floyd policing bill to be passed by the anniversary of his death. That is May 25th. So that really moves that to the top of President Biden's agenda if he can get that passed. Based on my conversations with sources on Capitol Hill, Republicans, they say, look, there is a real urgency to try to get something done. You heard Senator Tim Scott mention that he wants to get something done on policing as well. Of course, the devil's in the details, but broad agreement that now might be the moment. Savannah and Lester.
All right, Kristen, thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Let's turn to Stephanie Ruhle, because as we've been talking about, a big issue tonight, of course, has to do with jobs and the economy. Stephanie, as mentioned, the Biden administration has proposed $6 trillion in new spending. About $2 trillion of it has already passed, a relief act that, of course, the Republicans said tonight had very little to do with COVID relief and a lot more to do with Democratic priorities. But that was all deficit spending. These other two proposals, he plans to raise taxes on the wealthy to pay for. Do the numbers work?
Well, do the numbers work? The question is going to be, will the wealthy actually have to pay for it? You know, he was talking about companies that don't pay taxes at all. We had 55 major corporations in the last year pay no taxes. So whether you're going from 21 to 25% is somewhat irrelevant. Are you going to close the loopholes? And this idea, we're going to tax the wealthiest Americans, it's a great idea, but time and again, we don't see that happen. So Joe Biden has put forth a huge agenda that there's many, many items that a lot of people would like to have happen, but are we going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? You said it before. He keeps going back to jobs, jobs, jobs. Let's just share a little bit of that sound.
For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. Jobs. Jobs.
And that's how he's selling it. He's basically going through every single topic and bringing this back, saying long term, it will create more jobs. He's even comparing this when he talks about childcare, because childcare, even though you might say, how is this possibly infrastructure? It's fundamental for parents to be able to afford to go back to work. Right now, we have over 1 million mothers that haven't returned to work because we don't have childcare. Because he is now saying, I'm going to invest over $200 billion to create more secure childcare, pay those workers more money, and perhaps most importantly, limit childcare costs. For low and middle income families, no more than 7% of their household income should go to childcare. And if you do something like that, there's a good chance you're going to put more and more Americans into the workforce. And long term, Savannah, that will create more economic prosperity.
All right, Stephanie Ruhle, who covers business for us, thank you very much.
We will take a break and continue more of our coverage post speech to Congress after this.
You're watching NBC News Now. For many in this community, this is not new.
I know plenty of Asian Americans who feel very unsafe today.
We're getting past the point of being okay with just a post, with just a statement. We want action.
Right now on Morning News Now, we begin with the dawn of a new day in Washington.
Mr. President, you've been aspiring to this office for your whole career.
We're looking at vaccination manufacturing to nearly double over the course of the next month.
I just want to show you what's happening right now. They're making their way up the steps of the U.S. Capitol.
Our team of correspondents is here.
Tonight, the accelerated vaccination timetable as more states lift COVID restrictions. Is it your expectation that you can adapt to any variants out there? The president is talking about winning over some Republicans. Where might he compromise? Is there a chance people could be dealing with long-lasting symptoms for the rest of their lives? Those delivering kindness while fighting hunger in this pandemic.
How are you today?
Very grateful, believe me.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
You're watching NBC News Now.
The pace is accelerating to get vaccine doses into arms.
The hope is using advanced robotics to try to scale up to doing thousands of samples.
Welcome back. Wednesday night, NBC's special coverage of President Biden's joint address to Congress continues. We've had the Republican response, and now we want to turn to Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, key advisor to President Biden. And Congressman, we've been talking over these last few moments about how bold these plans are, how ambitious they are. I ask you, as a longtime Washington hand, how likely do you think that the president can get this across the finish line?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think the thing we have to remember, as the president has made it very clear, he seeks to reach across the aisle. He knows we will negotiate, we will have compromise, and I think that he is doing what I would do. Go big and get a lot of a big thing, or go small and get some of a little thing. So he's going big. Hopefully we'll find some common ground. He won't get everything he's asking for, but I think he has enough goodwill over on the Senate side and among the American people to get a significant portion of what he's trying to get.
What did you think about his remarks, Congressman, with regard to the George Floyd Policing Act, and also what Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, who you know well and who is key to the negotiations here? Do you hear that ring of common ground at all? Do you feel like something might happen here by that deadline that the president laid out tonight, late May, which is the one-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd?
Well, the president talked about us trying to do something by the anniversary of that death. And I was hoping that Tim Scott would talk about the legislation that he and Karen Bass have been working on for a year now. But he seemed to harken back to what was going on before this legislation got over there. That is the bill that we passed. We want, and the president asked, for us to do this legislation that was developed in the name of George Floyd, and that's what we ought to do, irrespective of what the House did before or what the Senate may have done before. Let's look forward. Let's go out into the future, and let's forget about all those things that we may or may not have done last year or in the previous Congress.
Congressman James Clyburn, who people will recall was so central to Biden's winning the nomination back in the Democratic primary. Thank you for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. This afternoon, this evening. This is a late hour for me,
I'm
sir.
surprised it took you this long to say that.
Congressman, thank you.
So Claire McCaskill is a former Democratic U.S. Senator from Missouri, and Rich Lowry is the editor of the National Review. Both are NBC News political analysts. Always good to have the two of you here. Claire, you know, as I was watching the president sell this ambitious, this bold, this very expensive plan, he seemed like a guy that was playing a stronger hand than he really has. Slim majority in the House, a divided Senate. He's going to have to give up a lot if there's going to be a compromise here, wouldn't you assume?
Well, yes, I think he's going to have to negotiate not just with Republicans, which he made clear tonight. He welcomed their ideas. But he's also going to have to negotiate with some of the Democrats that come from very Republican states in order to get a package that will get 50 votes, which is their goal in a reconciliation process. But make no mistake about it, there has not been so far any real effort by the part of the Republicans to be anything but against everything that Joe Biden is trying to do. It was a party line vote on COVID relief. Everything he's proposed, they have not proposed their own plans. So I think he did a really good job. You know, this right-wing trope that they were hiding Joe Biden because he couldn't talk and he couldn't deliver. I thought he gave very strong speech tonight and explained exactly why he's trying to go big and bold.
And Rich, some of these things at the end of the day, people may be popular to a lot of people. Does that tie the Republicans' hands to any extent?
No, I don't think so. I disagree with Claire. I think on infrastructure, if you wanted to go half a loaf, quarter loaf, you could get 10 Republicans or so and have a genuine bipartisan accomplishment. But I think what we heard tonight is the Joe Biden who imagines himself as a return of FDR. And as you're alluding to earlier, Lester, FDR in 1932, he had a 200-vote majority in the House. He had 58 senators. And here's Joe Biden with a single-digit majority in the House, the smallest Democratic House majority since Rutherford B. Hayes, and a tie in the Senate. So that's just a really narrow base from which to pursue such an ambitious agenda to remake the American economy and our society in certain respects. I think he'll get a fair amount of the spending because of the rules that allow you to do it with just 50 votes. But most of the rest of the things he talked about tonight won't happen.
Yeah, this is a president who, with that rescue bill, felt he had to have a win, had to show that something could be done. The question is, can he afford to lose on these next big initiatives of the infrastructure and American families?
Yeah, there's two questions. Can he get any Republicans and can he hold Democrats together? Rich and Claire, thank you. Let's go to Chuck Todd on that question, because already, I mean, the speech ended less than an hour ago, and we're starting to see some of these fault lines, even within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, no, pre-speech, I told you about some key Democrats saying, maybe we don't raise taxes, maybe deficit spend. Then you have Mark Kelly, who is a new Democratic senator, but because he ran in a specialist to run again in 2 years. And his one complaint about the speech tonight is he didn't think the president said enough about the crisis at the border. Again, let me repeat, an Arizona senator up for re-election in 2022, Savannah. I think that shows you that there are going to be Democrats that are going to be thinking about their own political futures, not just the president's.
But these are very enticing things that he offered, and as we said, people are going to be, they might want to pick and choose. I'm wondering if you look at it this way, that we're going to get past COVID at some point, and what will this look like in the rearview mirror? If this is in fact an era of big government spending, how will that look 2 years past?
Well, I mean, that's going to be that's the real question. You didn't know that Ronald Reagan succeeded until Bill Clinton said the era of big government is over. So we won't know if this big spending, if we've decided we want government back, until a Republican president comes in and acts like Eisenhower, Nixon, or Ford, who were the more big spending Republicans back in their day.
Well, the next chapter, of course, is to take it on the road, which the president and vice president will do to try to sell this.
That's right. In fact, the president is back at the White House tonight. He has left Capitol Hill, but he will hit the road tomorrow, and we will continue to watch this as it develops.
That's going to do it for NBC News special coverage of President Biden's address to a joint session of Congress and the Republican response.
And we're going to have, of course, much more tomorrow morning on Today on all of the networks of NBC News, and also tomorrow night on NBC Nightly News.
And Craig Melvin, by the way, is sitting down exclusively with President Biden to talk about his first 100 days in office. That interview will air Friday on Today. I'm Lester Holt with Savannah Guthrie. For all of us here at NBC News, thank you for joining us. Have a good night, everyone.